The older Andrew became, the more Anna realized how quickly time had passed. It felt like only yesterday she was tying his shoelaces before school and reminding him not to forget his lunchbox. Now he stood almost as tall as his father, his voice deeper, his face more mature, carrying himself with a quiet seriousness she had never seen before. At 43, Anna had built a peaceful life despite the long hours her husband spent away at work. Most evenings the house belonged only to her and Andrew, and although the silence between them had once been comfortable, recently it had become filled with unspoken thoughts. She noticed him staring out the window for long periods, losing himself in thought after ending phone calls with friends, and avoiding conversations whenever anyone mentioned dating or relationships. One evening she found him standing alone in the kitchen after dinner, nervously turning a glass in his hands. After several failed attempts to speak, he finally admitted that he was confused about himself. He explained that while many of his friends talked excitedly about crushes and relationships, he felt almost nothing. He worried that something inside him was missing. Instead of reacting with fear or trying to give immediate answers, Anna listened carefully. She assured him that people grow emotionally at different speeds and that uncertainty was not a flaw. She reminded him that discovering who you are is a journey, not a race, and that there was nothing wrong with taking time to understand his feelings. For the first time in days, Andrew seemed to breathe a little easier, knowing he could speak honestly without being judged. During the following week, Anna made a conscious effort to rebuild the warmth that had slowly disappeared from their home. Instead of trying to solve Andrew's confusion, she focused on creating an environment where he felt safe enough to explore his thoughts. They cooked dinner together, laughed over old family stories, watched movies, and spent evenings discussing the characters' decisions rather than their own problems directly. Anna encouraged conversations about empathy, trust, friendship, and emotional maturity, believing these subjects would help Andrew better understand himself without pressure. She also suggested that he stop comparing his life to his classmates. Everyone around him seemed eager to label themselves or fit into neat categories, but she reminded him that real life rarely worked that way. Some people recognize their emotions early, while others need years of experience before everything begins to make sense. Andrew slowly opened up about feeling isolated because everyone expected him to have answers he simply didn't possess. Anna admitted that adults often pretend to understand themselves better than they actually do. Her honesty surprised him. Instead of seeing his mother as someone with every solution, he began seeing her as someone who had also experienced uncertainty and had learned that growth comes through patience rather than certainty. A few days later, Anna suggested they volunteer together at a local community center where teenagers gathered after school. She believed meeting people from different backgrounds might help Andrew realize that everyone carries invisible struggles. Over several afternoons, they met students dealing with family problems, academic pressure, anxiety, loneliness, and questions about their future. Andrew found himself talking with a college volunteer only a few years older than he was, who admitted that he had spent most of high school believing he needed to fit into someone else's expectations before realizing he simply needed time to grow. Those conversations stayed with Andrew long after they returned home. That weekend, Anna also encouraged him to speak with a licensed counselor, explaining that asking for guidance was a sign of strength rather than weakness. Andrew agreed, and after several sessions he began understanding that his confusion wasn't about being broken at all. Much of it came from anxiety, unrealistic expectations, and the pressure to define himself before he was emotionally ready. Therapy helped him recognize that attraction, identity, confidence, and emotional security often develop at different stages. Anna never asked for details unless he wanted to share them. Instead, she simply reminded him that no matter what he eventually discovered about himself, he would always have a family that loved him unconditionally. Several months passed, and the change in Andrew became impossible to miss. He laughed more often, spent time with friends again, returned to playing basketball, and stopped treating every unanswered question as a personal failure. One quiet evening they sat together on the back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and violet. Andrew thanked Anna for never trying to force him toward any particular answer. He explained that what had helped most was knowing someone believed in him even when he doubted himself. Anna smiled and told him that every parent hopes to protect their child from pain, but sometimes the greatest gift is simply standing beside them while they discover their own path. Andrew nodded thoughtfully, realizing that confidence had not appeared because someone told him who he was. It had grown because someone gave him the freedom to search without fear. As darkness settled over the neighborhood, They sat in comfortable silence, no longer weighed down by confusion or expectations. Neither of them had all the answers about the future, but they no longer needed them. They had something far more valuable: trust, honesty, and the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them with compassion, patience, and unwavering family support. The weeks following Andrew's first counseling sessions brought small but meaningful changes that Anna noticed almost immediately. He no longer disappeared into his room the moment he came home from school, and the heavy silence that had settled over the house slowly began to fade. Instead, he joined her while she prepared dinner, asking about recipes, sharing funny stories from class, or simply standing nearby while she cooked. Their conversations were no longer centered on finding immediate answers. They had become about understanding life one step at a time. One evening, Andrew admitted that therapy had made him realize how much pressure he had been placing on himself. He believed he needed to have every part of his identity figured out before graduating, simply because everyone around him acted as though they already did. His counselor had challenged that belief, explaining that many people spend years discovering who they are, what they value, and what kind of relationships they truly want. Anna smiled gently and reminded him that adulthood wasn't a finish line reached on a birthday. It was a lifelong journey filled with questions, mistakes, growth, and unexpected discoveries. Hearing those words from someone who had lived through decades of change made Andrew feel less alone than he had in months. As summer approached, Anna encouraged Andrew to spend more time outside the house instead of allowing fear to keep him isolated. He accepted an invitation to volunteer at the local youth center, helping younger students with homework and sports activities. At first, he worried that he wouldn't fit in, but the experience surprised him. He met teenagers carrying struggles very different from his own, some dealing with divorced parents, others facing financial hardship, bullying, or anxiety about college. Listening to their stories changed his perspective. He realized that nearly everyone carried invisible fears beneath confident smiles. One afternoon, an older volunteer named Daniel shared how he had spent years comparing himself to everyone else before understanding that personal growth couldn't be rushed. "The moment I stopped trying to become someone overnight," Daniel said, "was the moment I actually started growing." Those words stayed with Andrew long after the conversation ended. For the first time, he understood that uncertainty wasn't evidence of failure. It was simply part of becoming an adult. Meanwhile, Anna also found herself changing through the experience. Supporting Andrew had forced her to reflect on her own life. She realized how often she had hidden her own worries behind the appearance of strength. One evening, while sorting through old family photo albums, she showed Andrew pictures from her college years. She laughed about embarrassing hairstyles, difficult exams, friendships that had faded, and dreams that had changed completely over time. Andrew was surprised to learn that his mother had once felt just as uncertain about her future as he did now. She admitted that even adults continue learning, adapting, and questioning themselves. That conversation erased another invisible barrier between them. Andrew stopped seeing his mother as someone who possessed every answer and instead saw her as someone who had earned wisdom through experience. Their relationship became stronger because it was built on honesty rather than perfection. They learned that trust grows when people are willing to admit they don't always have everything figured out. By the end of the summer, Andrew felt like a different person, not because every question had been answered, but because he had stopped demanding immediate certainty from himself. He laughed more freely, reconnected with old friends, and even began thinking about college with genuine excitement instead of fear. One quiet evening, he and Anna sat together on the back porch watching the sun disappear behind the trees. The breeze carried the scent of fresh rain, and the neighborhood was unusually peaceful. After several moments of silence, Andrew looked at his mother and thanked her for listening instead of judging, for guiding instead of controlling, and for reminding him that confusion doesn't last forever. Anna smiled warmly and squeezed his shoulder, telling him that every parent hopes their child grows into someone kind, honest, and compassionate, and she could already see those qualities shining in him. They sat together as the first stars appeared overhead, both understanding that life would continue bringing new questions. But neither of them feared the future anymore. They had discovered that courage isn't about always knowing the right answer. Sometimes, courage is simply having the patience to keep moving forward until the answers reveal themselves in their own time.